Hello, welcome to the Popcorn Counter for the Two Real Cinema Club. We're a bit of a serious Popcorn Counter this time around. So, after we watch the film, we come back to the Popcorn Counter and we usually talk about ideas that have come up when we saw this week's films or previous films, or just notions that we haven't had the time and the space to cover in the main pod. This week we're going to talk about something a little bit different. So this is a story which caught my eye, which I think is worth discussing. So French actor Adèle Haenel, a couple of weeks ago, she very publicly retired from the film business. Cannes is going on at the moment, and this has kind of been like a news story that's slightly underpinning Cannes, or maybe overshadowed by Cannes. So she announced her retirement. She's a much decorated French actor, most famous for Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which I have not seen. Have you seen that?
I have not, no.
But she published this letter in the French magazine Télérama, talking about her retirement. I'm just going to read this letter. So this is the English translation of the letter. The letter was in French. I got the translation from the internet. I'm just going to read it, and then maybe we'll talk about it. But I think this is touches on some ideas that I think are worth discussing. Okay. So Adèle Haenel, she writes, I decided to politicize the end of my cinema career to denounce the generalized complacency of the profession towards sexual aggressors and, more generally, the way in which this industry collaborates with the mortifying ecocide and racist order of the world as it is. Let's make it clear. Biodiversity is collapsing, the militarization of Europe is spiraling out of control, hunger and misery continue to spread, and yet this industry, collegially gathered at the Caesar Awards, promoting its films, is obsessed with remaining light and talking about nothing. In the context of a historical social movement, we are waiting to see if the film industry's pundits are counting, like the sponsors of the luxury industry, on the police to keep everything going as usual on the red carpets of the Cannes Festival. Filling the media space with this void has a purpose: to make the bourgeois order as natural as the blue sky, to make the voices of those who organise resistance so that all humans can live with dignity, so that a future can be wrested from this planet, inaudible and marginal. To continue to make this system desirable is criminal. It is urgent. There is no longer a livable future for anyone in the very short term within the framework of capitalism. It is urgent to voice this alarm as loudly as possible. But they all join hands to save the face of Depardieu, Polanski or Boutin. It bothers them. It bothers them that the victims make too much noise. They prefer that we continue to disappear and die in silence. They are ready to do anything to defend their rapist bosses. Those who are so rich that they believe themselves to be of a superior species. Those who spectacularize this superiority by wallowing in pig-like noises, by objectifying women and subordinates. The leaders stand up and fart. The minions of capital sneer and applaud. They clutch their glasses of champagne rosé, ready to sing to these ultra-rich, lobotomized by power, all their best songs, to tell them that they will always be the most innocent, that it's true that the poor are poor, and it's unfortunate that women are raped, and it's unfortunate, but it's not the fault of the rich or the system that exploits them. And besides, the big industry produces in homeopathic doses films about heroic poor people, exceptional women, just to capitalise more and more on us without giving any strength to our movement. Let's keep everyone in their rightful place. I will say it again. Shame. Faced with the bourgeoisie's monopoly of speech and finances, I have no other weapons than my body and my integrity. Cancel culture in its literal meaning. You have the money, the strength and all the glory. You gargle with it, but you won't have me as a spectator. I cancel you from my world. I leave. I go on strike. I join my comrades for whom the search for meaning and dignity takes precedence over the search for money and power. Since 2019, I've continued my artistic work in theatrical and choreographic collaboration with Giselle Vienne. She is an artist who builds one of the most powerful works I've ever encountered. In the face of the detachment, emptiness and cruelty that the film industry sets up as an operating principle, The meaning, the work, and the beauty that she constantly puts into play are a light that allows me to keep faith in what the power of art can mean. So that is her letter. She touches on a lot of points which we kind of sometimes discuss here on the pod. Do you think that this is a call to arms that we should be listening to?
I think it's a really well-written analysis of reality, for sure. And I think it's great that she has really stood up for something and decided to leave the industry for very valid reasons, and she's articulated those reasons. I think that's brilliant. I like that she talks about, at the very end, the power of art, what art can mean. And I think she's conflicted, like so many artists and filmmakers probably are, that it ultimately becomes about selling things, and it becomes a business. And the businessification, let's say, of art can really lead to ruin, because generally the people who are most interested in business, the people who are most interested in money, and money is basically power. So you're looking at working with people who are really more interested in just having more power. And I think that's at the heart of it. What struck me halfway through your reading with this could really be said about a lot of different kinds of business and industry. I think they're all polluted with a lot of sort of machismo and just capitalist worship. And I think so that as much as it's a letter to the film industry, I think it actually also could almost apply to any other industry. It seems from my perspective here in the States anyway. So I'll start with that, and then I want you to share a little bit of what you think as well.
Well, it kind of raises this big question, which I'm never really sure how to approach. It's about separating the art from the artist.
Yeah.
A little while ago, I think it might have been when we were talking about Avatar: Way of Water, and we were discussing, well, what film should we compare this with? And I was going to suggest Knife in the Water, the early Polanski film. But I feel like I want to say, do we still watch films by Roman Polanski, or do we not? It's to make a choice about what you expose your eyeballs to is a political decision, isn't it? I think politics extends into every corner of what we do and the choices that we make. And maybe I kind of feel like, perhaps we shouldn't be talking about Polanski films.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's right they should be cancelled. But then, what about films that were produced by Harvey Weinstein?
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to throw those on the bonfire? I mean, maybe we should. Maybe that's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
What about Woody Allen? Should we still be, we were laughing about Annie Hall just a couple of weeks ago. But should we still be laughing about Annie Hall? How wide do we spread the net? And does cancelling people then also negate the work of people who were involved in these works who aren't rapists or sex offenders?
Precisely.
Cinema is the symphony of the arts.
Yeah.
It takes more than one person to make a film, no matter what any director might tell you.
Yeah.
Where do we draw the line? What is our role in trying to effect change? I don't really know. I find these questions very hard.
I think they are. I think the most important thing to be is aware. I think we need to know about some of these players in the industry, and mostly some of these men who have pasts that we weren't really aware of previously. So the first thing is we just have to know who's who and what they're doing and what they're really like. And I know it becomes really, really discouraging because there are just so many bad men involved in Hollywood. But again, as I said earlier, probably in a lot of different businesses and a lot of different industries. But we've swept a lot of our history in this country under the rug, and we don't want to look at it. I think what's happening right now with wokeism, if you want, or just this cultural awareness, is we're starting to really look more honestly obviously our history. So it's fantastic if we get the information so we know who these people are. In terms of separating the art from the artist, I don't watch Woody Allen anymore because he makes shite films now. So it's not even a question for me anymore. And I think I can say the same of Roman Polanski. I haven't seen a Polanski film in at least 20 years. So I'm just not watching these guys anymore anyway. But she, in asking that question, it occurred to me that she's doing exactly that. She's separating herself as an artist from her art, which is filmmaking. She's taken herself out of that industry because of it. So, yeah, I think these guys are going to die off or be canceled to the point where they'll be out of the industry anyway. But you're right. We've got these records of, there were some great Woody Allen films that I saw as a kid before when I was ignorant. I was ignorant about his past, and I was also ignorant as I was just so young that I enjoy them, and they live in my memory somewhere nostalgically. But Manhattan does make me just cringe. I mean, he's with a young Hemingway. Is that Mary Hemingway there?
Yeah.
And she's 18. He's talking about her in high school at the time, or 16 or something like that. And I guess what is he being super honest at that moment and making that film that he casts himself with such a young girl? Maybe he was telling us something, but. And I know that on other levels, like in terms of, as you said, like the cinematography of that film is beautiful. So are you going to cancel the entire film and the cinematographer's work as well because Woody Allen is who he is? I understand why you're wrestling, because those are some people who've made great films, and we could have watched Knife in the Water, of course. But it definitely puts everyone into this troublesome place, because there's some things I appreciate about cancel culture, but for me the most just honesty. I just want to see the honesty about our pasts and about who these people are at present, and they can be named now. I think it makes it more uncomfortable because some of these people are making works that we like, or we respect their art, but we don't respect them as people. And I think awareness is the most important thing. That's like the first step, just to know what's going on, to make sure that women especially are free to speak about what's happening behind the scenes. And, in her letter, she's doing that. And, she's doing something very brave in the sense that she's sacrificing a potential livelihood and a career as an artist to get away from the people who actually kind of make the art happen on that commercial level.
I mean, you are right that film is not the only industry where there is bad behaviour. There's been like a series of stories very recently in the UK. The head of the CBI, which is like I'm not sure if it's a government or non-governmental organisation which is involved in promoting industry, had to resign fairly recently for being inappropriate and badly behaved with female staff. And then I think just last week, someone who was the head of Tesco, which is one of the biggest supermarkets in the UK, had to resign over being inappropriate and not behaving himself with female members of staff. It is rife, and I absolutely agree. Transparency is one of the most valuable weapons in the fight for a better future. But the film business is traditionally not very good with transparency. Yeah. It's a business built around the very core of telling seductive lies.
Yeah.
And so, it's unsurprising that seductive lies will then seep off the screen and into the real world.
Yeah.
We don't look at pictures by Adolf Hitler, do we? We don't kind of say, well, he was a reasonable artist, even though I disagree with some of his ideas. I mean, there's no ambiguity there.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not an entirely appropriate analogy, but I wonder whether in the same way that, I don't know whether you know who Gary Glitter is, who was like a British pop star who was very popular in the 70s and then was kind of put away for sex offences against children. People don't play Gary Glitter records anymore, even though he recorded all his records 40 years ago or more. I wonder whether we may reach a point before too long where people will just decide, we're not going to schedule any of these Roman Polanski films anymore. These films that were produced by Harvey Weinstein, we're just not going to schedule them anymore. They will fade away. They will not be part of the central canon of cinematic culture.
Yeah.
It will disappear. Does that mean that people in general will behave better within the film industry, though? I don't know. David O. Russell apparently is a very problematic, difficult person.
Oh, yeah.
But he has still been making movies until very recently. I'm not sure how much genuine hope I hold for a total revolution in the attitudes of wealthy and powerful people towards women.
Yeah, you raised a good question. Like, you'd like to think that, when these guys die off or they leave the industry entirely, that all will be well. But, and again, it would be important that their history stays with them, that we know who they are in the future as we do in the present. I do wonder, to a certain extent, like some of the people from the golden age, I'm sure there were also sons of bitches in charge of the industry that we know a little bit about, but we probably don't know nearly as much about due to the nature of social media and archives and telecommunication and all that. So I think there's just have always been bastards. And I think the reason it's so frustrating is because it's very often the bastards who sort of rise to the top because they just have that very centralized view of making a profit on the backs of others and treating others however they want to in order to achieve their own successes, I think. So I think it's more about like the classic power corrupting sort of theme, and the fact that people, they sort of get inflated. They inflate themselves to this point where they feel like they can treat anyone the way they want to because they're in a position of power. So for me, I like being powerlessness. It makes me kind of a nicer guy, I think.
I was trying to explain to somebody a while ago where the screenwriter's role is in the power structure of the film industry. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was laughing as well, and I was kind of trying to explain. In the center of the film industry, the people right at the center are producers, and then close to those producers, there'll be important directors and major film stars, and then the further you get out from that epicenter, you'll have people who are big supporting actors and people who are casting agents, and people who have less power, but they are still powerful, and that power gradually wanes the further you get away from the center of the city. Yeah. And if you go all the way to the very, very outermost circle of the city, you will find there's a bus stop. And every Tuesday and Saturday, a bus leaves that bus stop and it goes like over the hills to a tiny abandoned village. And in the basement of a wrecked house in that abandoned village, that's where they keep the screenwriters all gathered around like a 20-watt bulb waiting for a phone to ring, which never rings. Yeah. So I certainly am not in a position where I have very much power. The power I do have, I have two kinds of power, just like you, which is I have the power to choose not to work on a project. And I have the power to choose what I watch as well. We're not just writers, but we're also consumers of cinema. Mm-hmm. And so we can make a choice about what we consume, or we can make a choice about what we say no to. Yeah. I have a very, very peripheral, not much of an anecdote about this. There was a project that I was involved with 5 years ago or so, which had an executive producer involved who was bringing some money into the project. Project never ended up getting made, but he was bringing some money in, who was apparently notoriously handsy with young women. And I remember going to, it was a reading which my agent had set up, and he and his assistant were kind of saying, just make sure you keep so-and-so away from all the young women in the room. And so, their job was just to try and, keep him occupied and make sure that he just, he just spoke to the young men. And so, they would ask me, make sure you go over and speak to so-and-so. And I had, a chat with him about this and that, just to distract him from then cornering some vulnerable 20-year-old woman in the dark end of the room. And you look back now, and at the time I felt, a little bit embarrassed and a little bit whimsical and a little bit like I felt like I was doing the right thing by just trying to distract him. But you look back on it now and you kind of think, well, wait a second, why was that acceptable that his behavior should just be mitigated against rather than called out?
That's right. Like you have to conform to his way of doing things.
Exactly.
Awful. Yeah. I think, to a certain extent, things have improved. Well, I see it as like a growing industry, even if it's been around for 100 years. Casting couches were much more common, probably even 40 and 50 years ago. And I think we've had some growth away from that, some evolution, probably not nearly enough. But I think, people who are calling out some of the real transgressors, I think that's a positive thing, because now we've got some power where people are listening, I think, and we are a bit more open in the eyes to what's really happening and who these players are. And I think that's a step in the right direction. Again, it's slow. It's far too slow, but I think we're having growing pains, and that's why we sort of wrestle with this separation of art and artist, I think, as well. So it's natural. I think it's a long game. Sadly, a lot of the human race. I mean, I think we're used to things happening fast, but human evolution is slow. So I think that we've made even any progress has to be at least a tiny step in the right direction.
It's nice to move in the right direction, but I do slightly worry that it's not fast enough, isn't it? This is the other thing that Adele Haenel refers to in her letter, isn't it? Which she just says that under capitalism, there is a clear, imminent danger to all life on Earth.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have movement in the right direction. It's dreadful that the movement is tiny baby steps.
Yes,
but you know what? Are we just going to run out of time? Is the Earth going to get rid of us before we're able to effect any proper social change? I suspect it is. I
think a little bit.
What consolation is it to the woman who gets sexually assaulted tomorrow?
Yeah.
That we can tell her, in 30 years' time, it'll all be much better, my dear. You kind of think, well, that's not much consolation, is it?
She has, I think, two of her favorite, my favorite lines. They're kind of separated by some distance, but I love it when she talks about homeopathic doses of films about heroic poor people and exceptional women. And then she's talking about how we're just ignoring all these things in terms of biodiversity collapsing, militarization of Europe, spiraling out of control, all these things that we should be talking about and working on. But we get these little glimpses of them. And I think that's one of the bigger questions for me is it's really hard to make stories that are going to be really widely seen that are about the important issues of certainly climate change or militarization of the entire world or sexism in the film industry. It's hard to get those films made because the people who are in the power of green lighting films aren't really interested in that, and also because they're not commercially they're going to make a lot of money. But I mean, these are at least the themes that we need to get into films, if not the films themselves, need to be made about these issues, and they won't be. I think that's and you see a little bit of it here and there, but that, for me, that's really discouraging because that's just snail's pace when we need to really be running like the hare, I guess, or the rabbit, right?
It often strikes me, going back to that idea about whether it's worth cancelling films that many people have worked on for the sake of the actions of the person at the helm. It's a little bit like the trolley problem, I think. That kind of like famous philosophical question of, there's a runaway train coming down the track, and you can, if you divert it, you can reduce the number of people who die, but not eliminate them altogether. So you have the choice to either keep the train going down the track that it's going down, where it's going to kill 5 people who are working on the track, or you can pull a lever, move the points, and send the runaway train down a different track where it will kill 1 person.
Yeah.
If you do nothing and if you weren't there, then 5 people would die. You have the chance to intervene, save those 5 people, but then you will kill 1 person who wouldn't have been killed if you hadn't intervened. Yeah. People kind of argue about the trolley problem a lot, but isn't the answer obvious? Which is, if you were to ask the 5 people whose lives you saved afterwards, I'm sure they would all say, I'm sorry that 1 bloke died, but I'm glad you saved us. Yeah. I mean, it's, I'm not a fan of utilitarianism, especially in medicine. Utilitarianism would suggest that we are better off murdering 1 healthy person if it means that 7 ill people get to use their organs for organ donation. You kind of think, that doesn't make sense. We don't murder people. But it always struck me that the trolley problem is, not a big quandary. It's blooming obvious. Try and save as many lives as you can.
Yeah.
And maybe the cancel culture question is kind of similar. Try and do the best thing for the most people.
Yeah. But the industry heads want to save the train that's worth more money. That's the thing. Right? Isn't that it? I think that...
Yeah, the industry people want to sell more first-class tickets at the front of the train so that more people can watch the victims be squashed by the wheels. That's right, yes.
Precisely.
Oh, man. Ultimately, you and I can kind of debate this as much as we like, and it's important that we talk about it. But I think our role inside the industry is so small, we're not going to change very much.
No.
Our role as consumers is small. We're not going to change very much. It's like you say, maybe tiny incremental movements.
Yeah.
Well, at least trying to move in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think that's right.
I was going to say, perhaps I'm not going to watch any more Polanski films.
Probably not, but again, because they're shite now. I think for me also, just writing stories that somehow challenge the current power structure and the ways that we do things currently. And if that can be that, you might have that one character that's just speaking out against things, or you might have a theme that's really, really appropriate or timely in terms of what's going on in the world right now. So I think you can write stories that are better, I think, and involve more people and more perspectives in them. I think that definitely will make a difference ultimately. Whether they get made or not, you've written it, it's out there, and maybe it gets produced.
Yeah, if everyone was writing inclusive stories, then then producers would have no choice, I suppose. It's either chat GPT or use the inclusive stories. I am slightly reminded of a script meeting I went to once where a producer who was also kind of co-writing the project was kind of saying, trans people, they're in the news a lot at the moment. Do you think we can squeeze a trans person into this story? Yeah. I was kind of think, inclusion is good, but maybe you haven't quite... maybe the reasoning behind it I don't agree with. I'm not sure. But then, actually maybe the reasoning isn't important as making the progress.
Yeah.
Oh dear. I feel like this is an important topic, and I'm not sure that I've illuminated my thinking any more than before I started reading that fantastically well-written letter.
Yeah.
I wish Adele Haenel all the best.
Yeah.
More power to you. I hope I have the bravery to follow in your footsteps. That's what I have to say.
Yeah. I think she got us thinking, she got us talking, and those are good things. I think we're struggling with this just the way everyone else is, and I think at least we're struggling. A lot of people will avoid it altogether and not want to struggle and not want to be uncomfortable. But I was happy to be uncomfortable with you during this popcorn counter.
Yeah, good. Bit of discomfort. That's what we like.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a good popcorn counter. We will see you next week for something a little bit more lighthearted. Thank you for joining us. Popcorn counter.